Thank you. It's an honor and a privilege to be able to moderate this roundtable discussion with some of our Attica brothers. I'm going to introduce them shortly. They'll be coming in. I'll tell you the names of the people who will be joining us. We'll have James Lateef Asbury, Eddie LaShore, Akil Larry Killebrew, and Che Jorge Nieves. So let's just give a moment while they come on screen with me, and then we'll start the discussion. Okay, I think everyone will be visible in just a moment. Is everyone unmuted?
Yeah, I think I am.
Okay. So, first of all, thank you so much for giving me the honor to moderate this panel with you all. It's really important that our audience has a chance to learn a bit about the history and the legacy of Attica. We know in this short time we won't be able to cover everything, so we're going to try to touch on some of the highlights, okay? And hopefully our audience will go to the website to learn a lot more. So my first question is going to be to you, Che, and I'm going to need you to unmute. And the question is to please describe the conditions in Attica in leading up to September 9th, 1971. You have to unmute, Che. Okay. Now we can hear you.
Are you talking to me?
I'm talking to Che. Che, please describe the conditions in Attica prior to September 1971.
The conditions at Attica were horrible. I'll begin by saying that the food, as an example, was lousy. Pork every day, the same food every day. That was one condition. The other condition was that we got showers once a week and toilet paper once a month. That was another condition. Other conditions were the medical situation. Whenever we went to see these two Nazis at the infirmary, they will give us aspirins, regardless of what illness you had an aspirin, you know, and they would never have no contact with you. It was through a little screen. So that was another condition. The Black Muslims, as an example, you know, they wasn't allowed to have religious services in the yard, you know, so there was problems with that. The Hispanic population, as an example also, was the mail, you know, when it was received, if it was written in Spanish, it was ripped up. Why was it ripped up? Because there was nobody there to read Spanish. And so they would rip up the letters. Most of the Hispanic families that came up to visit their loved ones, if they didn't speak English, they were in trouble. They were not allowed into the prison. So those were the conditions, you know, that led up to rebellion. You know, I mean, people was totally tired of these type of conditions, you know, and plus they didn't treat us like human beings. They treated us like slaves. They treated us like we was nobody to them, you know, and I mean, how far could you go, you know, with these type of conditions until you start rebellion, you know, just like, you know, when you put a dog up against a corner and you hitting them and you hitting them and you hitting them and you hitting them, eventually that dog is going to bark you. It's going to bark at you, regardless of how much that dog may love you. It's going to bark at you. So it's the same with us. You know, we just couldn't tolerate the conditions any longer. You know,
Okay.
I mean,
Okay, Shay, thank you. And we're going to come back to that in a moment. But I turn to Akil because I know that in order for people to really understand what took place on the 9th, they have to understand the layout of Attica because it's different from most of the other prisons. So Akil, would you do that for us? Would you explain to the audience how Attica was set up and still is set up for that matter?
Attica is like a big box with a cross in the middle of it. And each section inside that cross is a block, A block, B block, C block, and D block. They also had another block, which is E block, but that wasn't in that section. These 4 blocks connected at a place called Times Square. And that's when everybody used to come through to either go to the mess hall or work programs or whatever they had to do. But Attica, it was simple. It was set up like a block with a cross in the middle of it, and you was confined to your block. The only time you was allowed to see if you had a father in another block, if you did see him coming out the mess hall, if he was at the last tail end of another block coming out, you may catch him. But on the 4th of July, they opened the doors for an hour and a half, and they let you switch over to different blocks. Other than that, Attica was just a place set up like a block with a cross in the middle of it, and that's it. You were confined to your block, and that's it.
So you didn't really have, if you were in A block, you had little to no interaction with someone in C block or D block?
No, the only way you can see someone is if by chance you're walking down the corridor and you look out the window and you say something, but you wasn't supposed to talk to other people in other blocks. They try to keep you separated from everybody. You know, Attica was maximum security. And, you know, the only time you got a chance to deal with it, congregate, you had to do it on the 4th of July. That's when they open the blocks up for an hour and a half, that you transfer over. They give you 15 minutes to change. If you want to go to this block, you can. That's the only time you get to see someone. Other than that, you was in your own block, and that's who you was with.
Okay, thank you for that, Akil. So I'm going to turn to you, Latif. I know from talking to you before, you had I guess we'll say the misfortune of having arrived at Attica just 30 days or so before the 9th and before everything took off. So what was your impression of Attica? What was the atmosphere as you would describe it, having gotten there just 30 days earlier?
For me, I think I turned 20 in 70. I'd gotten discharged in 69, but the thing was I was adjudicated as a youthful offender, which means that if I did these 4 years, they told me they was going to give me probation, but they ended up sentencing me. So I went to Elmira Reception Center, and from there, they put me in a camp way up in the mountains cutting wood for a fire trail, cutting trees for a fire trail. I got out, I violated. They sent me to Attica. It was like as different as night and day because it was totally suppressed and oppressed. You could feel that. It was so thick that, you know, you could actually cut that. And the only thing you could do is come out when they cracked your cell. That was either eating, sick call, or work, or visits, depending on those things. But other than that, you were sort of like totally in your cell. Rec, you'd come out for rec, you know, go out to the yard for whatever time rec was. It seems like to me, as soon as you got into it, it was time to lock up. So I was trying to adjust and get used to these things. When I went for a job interview, they told me that since I really didn't have a whole lot of stuff being on the inside, since I was young as I was, and where I came from, I was, you know, I'm born in upstate New York, Rochester. I also did pretty well in Elmira, but that's where I was thinking they were going to send me back to. But when I arrived at Attica, it was like the first thing and the first impression I seen was this 30-foot wall. And to me, I said, who's going there? They turned in there. So I said, well, it's us. Real.
Okay. I've heard a number of people say that it was a very tense situation there. Was that your impression, that there was a lot of
Oh, they
tension?
talked to us horribly. They didn't care. They may call you the N-word just because. And I guess it was all according to your presentation. You know, a man is not going to be docile 24/7. You know, enough is enough. So pretty much what I did was just responded as courteously as I could. So I guess on that point, it kind of helped me get through. You know, I wasn't trying to be, you know, caught up in the mess because I didn't know what the procedures were. I had to learn them. So I had a lot of friends I grew up with and went to school with, and they found out I was there. So, you know, the communication, which is the underground thing, started working, and they were trying to tell me or convey to me what block to try to get in because that's the block they were in and things like that. But it didn't even last that long. I made the mistake of saying they played football there. It was in Auburn that we played football. I remember getting hurt there and going to going to the hospital. But anyway, I remember that there was just nothing to do. They had a radio. I think it was 3 stations. One was a TV. I don't know if I'm correct. Now that's been like 50 years today. I know there was 3 stations. You could either listen to TV in terms of whatever they wanted to put on, or 2 other stations. One was country and western, of course. The other could be rock or it could be soul. They had what was WDNK or something like that in Buffalo. They used to call it WUFO, WFO. Yeah, WUFO. They played that maybe once or twice a week, and we were able to get a little bit of enjoyment of that. So other than that, it was just totally oppressive and suppressive.
Okay.
Like I said, the language, and you could see those other things coming out. And actually, they were talking about going home to plow and to plant and all of those things. I'm like, okay. And it was isolated. Wyoming County was totally isolated, and it was more or less like a farm community.
Okay. From there, thank you, Lateef. I'm going to shift to you, Eddie. You were in Attica in September of 1971 as well. But tell us about what happened for you when you arrived there, and around when was that?
I arrived in November of 1970, so it was almost a year before the uprising. And when inmates go in, at least for the first time, they go through an orientation, and the assistant warden was there. I think his name was Fail. And so they tell you a bunch of stuff. But what really struck me, what really stood out, was he says to me, listen, if you're smart, you stay away from the blacks. And I'm like, what? And he said, if they want to hang out with you, it's always for the wrong reasons. They just want something from you. It's just going to be a problem. If you're smart, you stick to your own kind. And I'm sitting there going, you're not even subtle about your strategy of dividing up the inmates, but that's what they wanted to do. And I think what was really significant about what happened leading up to the uprising and during the uprising and after was that the inmates saw through that. They saw that in order to get anything done, we had to stick together. And we had to not buy into that division. And there were, you know, this was all happening within the political backdrop of what was going on in the country. In the late 60s and in 1970, you know, you had a lot of political stuff going on, you know, against the war and within the civil rights movement. And you had, you know, these leading figures like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and Angela Davis and so on. So there was a growing political awareness that was happening outside and a movement that was happening outside. And it also was taking place inside as us inmates were expanding our political understanding, our political awareness, in understanding how we had a common cause. And a lot of that was fed in organizing that went on inside prior to the uprising. And I'm not talking about organizing an uprising, because the uprising was spontaneous. That was not planned. There was a spark because of the tension that the other brothers have been talking about. It didn't take much to set it off, right? Mm-hmm. But what happened was the warden, Mancusi, was, I have a hard time avoiding any
Don't do it. Don't do it.
I won't do it. But that guy, he just as a showpiece, he set up a sociology class because there was an inmate in there that had taught at the university level sociology. So he says, I'm going to make it look good and create a sociology class. So think back about what Akil said. Attica was really 4 prisons, maybe 5, but really 4 separate prisons that were divided. Well, with the sociology class, there was actually a classroom where inmates could come. It was within the school where they could actually gather. The school was primarily self-study. You turn in a lesson and it comes back to you. And I was a teacher over there. So I would correct lessons.
Eddie.
Yeah.
I just want to pause you for a second so that everybody understands. When you say that people would come to the sociology class, are you saying that people from different blocks could intermingle in this class?
Yes.
Okay.
And the thing is, it was a sociology class, but what it quickly turned into was a place where brothers from different cell blocks in different organizations like the Young Lords Party, Black Muslims, Black Panthers, and guys like Sam Melville, who was a really significant figure before and during the uprising. He was murdered, on the 13th. And so there was white and black and Latino, and we were able to sit and talk and go, what are we going to do? How are we going to overcome this? And we were reaching out to people on the outside, like Assemblyman Arthur Eve, who was very open-minded and responsive, and like Reverend Scott in Rochester, and trying to communicate with these people to try to get some changes made. They weren't trying to start a revolution. They were trying to reform and make things better. Right. And this communication went on, and we were able to break through the racial tension and create unity. And I think when the uprising took place, that helped things gel so that when hostages were taken, they said, okay, what are we going to do? Let's get together. Because I'll tell you what.
Okay, wait, Eddie, wait, you moved from...
I'm getting ahead of you?
You're getting ahead of me a little bit. Because I don't want us to skip over George Jackson and his death, because that's a significant piece.
Well, that was August 27th.
I know. Hold on. Shay, do you want to speak to that?
Yes.
George Jackson's death?
Brother George, he was assassinated August 21st of 1971. During that time, we in Attica, the Young Lords and the Black Panthers and the Muslims, we were trying to figure out what we're going to do, to commemorate brother, to pay our respects. And so we came up with what is called the hunger strike, where we organized the population very disciplinedly to participate, and many people participated. We walked into the mess hall, and quietly, without even making no sound, we sat down, and many of us, including myself, we had black armbands, and we waited for the guard to give us the signal so that we could move out, and we did. Brother, the brother's assassination was something that many of us could not accept. The fact that he had a gun underneath his afro, that's ridiculous. We knew that was a lie, and so the hunger strike was very successful, and everybody participated, blacks, whites, Latinos. We all came together on that, even though a lot of whites probably didn't even know who George Jackson was. But the mere fact that we were all there, in the same conditions, many of them just got down and participated. So you just made a point. You said many people maybe didn't know who George Jackson was. It occurs to me some of our audience listening weren't born by 1971. So they may not know who you're referring to when you talk about George Jackson or where he was killed, because it wasn't in Attica. So could you just take a moment and explain that in a sentence or two so that we set the context? Okay, briefly, let me just say that Brother George was arrested. I think he was 17 years old when he, no?
In what state? Where?
In California.
Okay, that's what I want to make sure people understand.
Okay, he in California, he was accused of stealing, I think it was $70 or $75 from the gas station, something like that. $10? Okay.
Yeah.
You know, and so he was incarcerated. At first, he was at Soledad, you know, and I think that he went to the same channels that I went to, you know, to get politicized. You know, he started reading, you know, like I did, and he started politicizing himself. He started educating himself, like Brother Malcolm X did when he was in prison. He educated himself, you know. So I think that Brother George, myself, and Malcolm, we share a lot of things together. We share a lot of experiences of prison, you know. But Brother George, once he became politicized, he started organizing. And I think that's one of the reasons why they transferred him out from Soledad to St. Quentin. You know.
Okay, so let's pause. Let's pause, Chen. I appreciate that, and I think it helps people to understand why his murder in the prison was such a significant thing and why there would have been a hunger strike at Attica because of his murder. But we'll turn to Akil now. A few minutes ago, Che made a reference to when the guards gave the signal to move out. Could you describe how did the guards communicate with you as far as giving that signal? What did that consist of?
First of all, you have to understand that the guards at that time, a bunch of them was idiots, you know. Had the prison's not been there, half of them would have been unemployed because none of them had skills. Their whole livelihood surrounded with that prison. I think that prison was built in 1945. From that point on, it was a family connection. Everybody that went there, grandfathers, fathers, grandsons, you know, they all grew up working in the prison system. So they were situated. They were stupid, so they used to walk down. They didn't know how to deal with people. They didn't know how to respect people. They didn't have no self-respect for themselves. When I was in D Block, I was in a third cell on 38 Company. And I used to hear them outside talking, arguing, and cursing, and the stuff they used to do at night at the bar. And they was just downright dumb. And when we came out, the system, not only in Attica, in all the state prisons at that time, just like at that time, you didn't lock out after 4:30. When you walk down the hall, two bangs on the wall with a club was the move. When they wanted you to stop, they hit it one time. You know, they didn't even talk to us. I mean, they treat us like we was cattle, you know, and if you violated that rule, then you get a key block, you know, or whatever else may come with that, you know, depending on how you reacted to the key block. But it was a bad situation there. You know, they didn't communicate. They tried to avoid us. Like Eddie said, they didn't have no dealings with a lot of blacks from the city and from Buffalo, because Buffalo is like New York, but a smaller New York, sort of. Rochester, a lot of blacks come from these areas, even Syracuse. But they just didn't have no dealings. They should have been taught a people's course to deal with other people. You know, they wasn't taught that. They were just put in there because they knew that was the job they was going to do when they was able to start working. And they got a lot of benefits from that, you know. So they didn't have no respect for us as human beings.
Okay.
You know, and they showed it in their actions.
So I thank you. Thank you, Akil. I think we've kind of set the tone and the atmosphere of what was leading up to September 9th. So now we're going to shift to the morning of September 9th. And I'm going to start with Lateef. Could you briefly describe what the morning of September 9th, how it unfolded for you?
Yes, I have been working outside, what we call outside the gates and stuff like, you know, trimming flowers, cutting weeds and stuff like that, but I was going outside. And in a lot of respects, that was sort of like a good good deal because you got to go beyond the wall, but it was still prison because you worked 2, 3, 4 hours and then you had to go back in. I hadn't got really acclimated to that, but it was just something to do other than being in the cell 24/7. So I remember that that night they put a key block on my door. That means, like I said, you either have some type of appointment, so it wouldn't be necessary for you to go to your assigned, like duty, like from the mess hall to there. So I remember all this commotion, and that was coming from A block. And was it A block? I think it was because I was in C block. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention it. I was in C block, which housed most of the outdoor workers, landscapers and stuff like that, and the cooks. So a lot of the people had, that were cooking and stuff like that. They got up all times in the morning or they slept in depending on, what shift they were working. So I know I heard a lot of cussing from the ones that were still trying to sleep. But what happened is that I heard all this crashing and hollering and yelling and things like that. And I'm like, what's really going on? Somebody had mentioned the horn, and they said the only time they ever heard that was the escape. I had never heard it because I just got there. And I'm saying, what in the world is going on? They gonna kill us or what? So I heard somebody say, go to the yard, follow everybody, go to the yard. If you don't, if you try to stay behind, we're gonna do something to you, And in prison, that meant do something to you. So I got with the crowd. Wherever the crowd went, I turned. When they turned, I turned. And then what I remember is that I seen a lot of sunshine. And that was the yard. And there was a lot of celebrants out there because, they had taken control. So their first impulse and instinct was that they were going to have some fun. And I'm still sort of like in awe because I'm saying this is kind of real serious. I've never experienced anything like this. Because in my gut was telling me they're going to get on that wall, they're going to shoot everybody. But it didn't happen.
Well, it didn't happen on the 9th. But let's pause right there.
That was the 9th. When we got to the yard.
No, but I'm saying they didn't shoot people on the 9th.
No.
That eventually happened.
They held out because I think they said, well, we'll first try to negotiate.
Right. Now, I realized, and thank you for that, Lateef, I realized in asking you to describe the morning of the 9th, we didn't talk about the evening of the 8th.
That was sort of like somber. That's all I can remember. Word was going around. Word gets around. You may be isolated, but word still gets around. We used to fly kites, and all the guys know what that is. That's tying something to a string and shooting it down the hallway. Somebody would have a clothes hanger and reel it in, and if it wasn't for them, they'd reshoot it. That kind of stuff. But that was our method of communicating. If somebody wanted something that somebody else had in the canteen and they didn't want it, he'd send it down, and that's what it was. Back and forth. Somebody knock on your wall and say, "This coming to you," and you send it on down. So that's how we did. Coffee, cigarettes.
But Lateef, hold on, Lateef. There was something that happened the evening of the 8th.
there was a disturbance between an African American and a white young man. But they were actually not in a scuffle. They took it for that, and I guess in trying to subdue both of them, they all ended up fighting. So they locked them up, and the guy went to the box. But those that observed it, I guess that was the straw that broke the camel's back because it didn't sit well with anybody. And, you could hear the whispers when it got down. So, yeah, they say something's going to jump off in the morning when they pop those cells. And that's what happened.
So let me pause you there. I don't know, Akil, if you want to add to that about what happened the evening of the 8th.
Yes, I do. I knew Leroy Dewar. In fact, I knew him when he came home in Auburn. He came from Auburn. He was one of the Auburn people that was sent to Attica because we had a little riot in Auburn. We wanted to celebrate Black Solidarity Day, November 4th, 1970. And they wouldn't let us, so we went to the yard and, we did the same thing. We tore up everything, and when they finally got us back in our cells, they took the ones they considered ringleaders. And I was considered one of them, but I wasn't no spokesperson. I'm not a spokesperson. I was a physical person. And they sent me to the box, and from there I stayed until today. So anyway, Leroy was there with us. And when I got to Attica, he was already there. He had an argument from what we understood, what we heard. He had an argument with a white guy. But the thing is that we knew the police didn't like black people. So we heard that he was screaming and hollering when they took him off to the box, but the white guy was walking. And people wanted to find out what happened to him the next day when they came out. Now, I was in D block, mind you, but, you know, from what people said when they came and cracked my cell, they said, yeah, we wanted to find out what happened to Hakeem, was his name. And nobody told us, so they didn't pay us. They threw caution to the wind, and they didn't care how we felt. They wasn't going to tell us anything. Who do you think you are, you know? So anyway, it broke in A block. All I remember on the 9th is my door being cracked, and the police wasn't doing the cracking of the doors. It was the inmates. And when I came out to D block yard, I was young, and the only thing on my mind was the same thing that was on my mind when Auburn happened, party time.
Let me pause you right there. Okay. And I'm going to turn to you, Che. Do you remember anything else that happened on the 8th?
The way it was told to me by some brothers of A block was that there was these two people, a white and a black, they were sparring. And I guess they were getting ready for football or something like that. And they were sparring. And so a guard came over and tried to break it up, and they couldn't. And so a lieutenant came over and he tried to break it up. And for some reason, one of the brother, he had his elbow moved back by accident and hit the lieutenant in the jaw. But the lieutenant did not do nothing at that moment. So that evening, when people got locked in for the night, you know, that's when the goon squad, and I call it goon squad because that's what they are. They come like in 5, 6 of them. You know, they look like football players, man. And they come and they take you out the cell and they just do you in. And so that's what they did. They went into the cells and did those two brothers in, and then took them out and then took them to segregation. While they were passing one Hispanic, I forgot his name because he used to be a good friend of mine. You know, he threw something at one of the guards and they looked back at him and they didn't say nothing. So the next day, should I talk about that? The next day.
Get there. You can talk about the next day. Yeah.
The next day, they opened up the cells to let people, you know, so that people could go to eat, you know, breakfast. But they kept that Hispanic brother, they kept him locked up. And so somebody, as they were going out, apparently the guard must have forgot, man, you know, to close the I don't know what you call it, where they open and close the cells. And he forgot it, and he left it open, and somebody came and opened it up, and that brother, Hispanic brother, he got out, and he went with 5 block. It was 5 block, 5th block. They went to you know, to breakfast. They went to breakfast, you know, and so when they came back, you know, it was time for them to have recreation. And for some reason, they noticed that there wasn't no recreation involved. They were gone back to their cells. And so, you know, people just said, no, man, we're going to have our recreation, you know, and that's when everything just went off.
Okay, now we're going to thank you, Jay. Before we get into what went off, because I don't want you to leave you out, Eddie. I know you were not in the same vantage point of Akil, Lateef, and Shay. Where were you when everything was starting on the morning of the night?
I was in segregation, the box. About the middle of August, I'd been politically involved, you know, because I was in the sociology class. And anyway, they kind of put 2 and 2 together and figured out, you know, I was actually, the sociology class was actually assigned to me Dickinson was the head of the school. When they paroled that other guy, he says, "You're in charge of the school." And then, so they shook down my cell. They found some quote unquote inflammatory literature in there, and they put me in the box for 60 days. And so I was up there when the other brother described the hunger fast for George Jackson. I was up there. I didn't know about it. I was up in the box. But on the 9th, all of a sudden I heard the whistle that Lateef was talking about. So I was up there throughout the entire uprising. But I knew what was going on because remember how I think it was one of the brothers mentioned there was radio. They actually, I had headphones in the cell, so I was listening to like NBC News in the cell, so I knew what was going on. And then later, on the 13th and everything,
Right.
you can ask me about that if you want. But yeah,
No,
I was up
to
in the box the whole time.
Okay, I definitely want to place where everybody was because that's important. We're going to come to that later. All right, Shay, we're back to you. Things have jumped off. At some point, you end up in the yard, right? Describe the scene in the yard.
Well, first of all, I was in B block, and all of a sudden I heard the siren go off. And it is known in Attica, I don't know about other prisons, which I've been in, but in Attica, when the siren goes off, most of the time it's because somebody escaped, a prisoner escaped, So that was my first thought while in the metal shop. Everybody stopped working. Everybody in the metal shop stopped working. They started listening to the sound. Very loud sound, and so I started looking towards the door, and I saw on the other side, I saw Sam Melville. He was, bro. And they were banging on the door and banging and banging. And I said, oh, shoot, man, what is that brother doing on the other side? But because I didn't know, then all of a sudden the door just gave in and Brother Sam, he came in, he said, y'all are free. I looked at the brother, I said, yeah, brother, I'm free. I'm really going to be free when I'm out of here. But I said, okay, I go along with that. And so I started running. I don't know where Sam Melville, he probably went trying to free other people. but I was running with the crowd. And as I got closer to the D yard, I noticed that there were some brothers that were coming. I'm not mentioning no names. Brothers were coming and had hostages, And I said, "Oh shit!" Oh, excuse me.
You didn't say that.
No, I didn't say that. That was French. And and I said, "Oh God, what's happening here? This is something that I didn't even imagine, And so I walked into the yard and I saw everybody all over the place. People were doing all kinds of drinking and, doing all kinds of negative stuff,
Let's pause right there, Shay. Let's pause right there.
Okay.
Because I'm mindful of the time and I want to make sure that we get the rest of it. So we have the initial scene in the yard. And then at a certain point, things start to get organized and there's a list of demands, right? Akil, is that something you can speak to?
I beg your pardon?
Are you able to talk about the demands that were developed and how things started to get organized in the yard?
Well, we organized and we voted to have people represent us in the yard. They got law and order. The Muslims took over because it was mayhem. Everybody was, and I was part of the fusion out there, even though I was political at the time, but I was young and wild, so I just wanted to get some commissary and whatever myself. But anyway, we organized, we got together and we voted certain people to speak for us. and the Muslims took over securing the guards' safety. And everything started to get organized at that point. That was going on really the end of the first day towards the second day, because right away, everything was like, everybody go for themselves, and once that happened, then things was sort of like, not really settled, but, you have to realize you're in a prison with people, some people was, really out of it, so they had to make a makeshift prison inside of a prison for them. And they took them off, I'm not gonna call no names, but they put them and locked them in cells because they wasn't fit to be in the yard, but we had a little organization there. We did. I don't wanna take up too much time because I wanna get to A block, so I'm gonna leave that like that, okay?
Okay. All right. One other question before we get to A block. The demands. There were demands that were crafted and put out. And I know, Eddie, you played a role in typing them, but before we get to that, I wanted to know, Che, are you able to tell the audience what at least some of those demands were?
Yeah, the restructuring of the parole board as an example, because when people go to parole board, they actually don't have no representation whatsoever, and they pass these decisions based on their own concerns and not based on the interests of the inmates. And so that was one of the things. The other thing was the mail. I mean, when you look at the 28 demands that were put on the table for discussion, when you really boil it down to it, just basic stuff: better food, better treatment,
Education.
the restructuring of the mail system, because all the mail was censored. All of it, whether you Spanish or English, they were all censored. And sometimes even brothers that didn't speak Spanish, even their mail was torn up, and so those were basic demands. When you look at the 28 demands, you break it down. There were very simple demands, changes within the prison system. That was what it boils down to. That's what we was asking for, changes. And also we was asking for one more thing. We were asking to be respected as human beings.
There you go.
Okay.
That's right.
Thank you, Che. Now we're going to move forward to what happened on the 13th. But
Did you want to ask me about the
I
manifesto?
am. I'm coming to you. And Eddie, I'm going to ask you to tell us quickly, because then we're going to talk about what happened on the 13th, and then we're going to have closing remarks.
Sure. Well, several months before the uprising in the spring, I think, there were 5 inmates called the Attica Liberation Faction who created 27 demands. And I worked up in the school, so I had a desk and a typewriter, and I don't remember who, but somebody came to me and said, hey, can you type this up? So I actually typed up the demands, slow, and made carbon copies, and those were sent out to Oswald and different people on the outside.
And who was Oswald?
Oswald was, he was the, was it called superintendent?
Corrections.
He was the commissioner.
Yeah, he oversaw the entire prison system in New York State.
Okay.
And basically what happened was he came and he met, but he just paid lip service to it and nothing happened. And that was right before the uprising. Now, the demands that were drawn up and presented after the 9th weren't the same demands exactly, but most of the content, ironically, was the same stuff that he ignored before, but now they're hostages at stake.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Eddie, because I wanted people to understand that piece of the history. Okay, now we're going to talk about the morning of the day. And Akil, I'm going to ask you to start, and you're going to have to do it kind of quickly, but I know you specifically have some information to share about what happened in A Yard, because we hear a lot about what happened in D Yard, but let's talk about what happened in A Yard briefly.
Okay, we all know what happened in D Yard, and I'm not taking anything away from that. But I want people to understand that they had 8 of us in A block corridor, as security. And that morning on the 13th, well, he's not here no more. Big Black came in with somebody else that was with him and they said, listen, you guys are in a hot spot. You know, we don't know how they're gonna come, if they're gonna shoot rubber bullets or real bullets. We don't know what's going on. Because I really thought they were shooting rubber bullets. We had a table on the floor with around 3 or 4 mattresses on it, you know, to dive down on. That day, when they left, we decided to stay up there. We said, no, we okay. You know, we stay up here, you know, because we wanted to stay together. We formed this like alliance with each other, and we just wanted to be with each other at the end. We didn't think it was going to be the end, but anyway, when they dropped that gas in the yard, the helicopter came above, and they started dropping gas. They were shooting gas down the corridor because if the people that was coming through know that all the police was up there. That was the administration area, and they was at the gate. When they opened the gate and started shooting, coming down the hallway, they was running. And it's like maybe it's not a minute run, but it was enough time for you to hear boots coming down the hallway and shooting. I seen the guy jump up from the gas because that gas was, man, you couldn't breathe. I've been gassed in other places. This was special, some type of special gas. And the guy jumped up and I saw blood gush out his neck. And the first thing that came to my mind was, oh shit. I mean, you know, they really shooting real bullets. So I told my friend Taxi, I said, listen, Taxi, get down. I said, when we go out that door, don't go out first and don't go out last. Let's try to get between. And when we came out the door, I got hit. And when I fell on the floor outside an A block's yard, because that's where we was at, an A block's corridor, somebody fell on my foot and I looked down because gas was starting to rise. It was Taxi. He was laying there. And then I heard the police come into the yard. And that's when they took me, told me I wasn't shot good enough. They knew me from Auburn. They had all the police up there that hated me. So they started kicking, spitting on me and everything. They didn't put that stick up my butt. I don't know what I would have done. I ain't down with that. But they did beat me and beat my testicles and everything. And they handcuffed me behind my back, ripped my clothes off me and made me run up A block corridor to a cell in A block. And they left me in there for like a half an hour with a police or a guard sitting in front of the cell. And they said, if he tries to make a move, blow his brains out. So I sat there with my hands cupped behind my back on the toilet bowl. And when they came back, they said, they came back with around 3 or 4 police. They said, come on out. So they took me out and I was walking across the yard to housing block Z at the time, the special housing unit now. And I saw them dumping bodies on an army truck. And I said to myself, this looked like a scene from the Twilight Zone. And they took me to housing block Z. Now I knew about that because I was sent there when I came from Auburn. That's where I went first before they put me in the population. So when I went to the block, I seen somebody in the hallway with a handkerchief around his face. And then I seen other people, so they pushed me and I ran up the stairs and they beat me up the stairs. And I had enough sense not to say nothing then, but I got stupid at the end. And I called them all kind of, you know, pig, MFers and everything. And they ran me back down and ran me back up again. And they put me in my cell. And I was still cursing them out. And somebody said, man, shut the hell up. You're going to get us all killed up here, man, with that stupid stuff. You know, nobody knows who's alive and who's dead. You got to be cool now. And that's when I calmed down. That was on the 13th.
Okay. Thank you. Now, I know there's going to... Okay.
I was on the west side of the block.
Okay. Thank you, Akil. There's going to be another panel after this, and I know they're going to cover some of what happened from that point forward. But since we have just a little bit of time left, I want each of you to be able to give a very short, emphasis on short, closings, what you think is the important thing for our audience to take away. And I know none of you got to share the whole story. We just don't have enough time for that. But what do you think is the most important takeaway in a sentence or two? And let's see, I'll start with you, Lateef.
The most important thing to me to take away was that I still believe I was going to get killed, like the brother was just talking about, because I too ran the gauntlet. And before I did that, LD pushed me down. We grew up together. You know, we were out in the streets together. And he said, man, get down. They're shooting. I was frozen. I couldn't do nothing. I couldn't believe it. So he pushed me down. And the next time I looked down, the guys were beating me and pulling my clothes off. He was bleeding. He said, go ahead, man. I'm going to be all right. And I was like in a daze from that point on. But as you know, we went through the days, the beatings and all that stuff, guys propping shotguns and pistols on the bars and clicking them and all that stuff. We're naked. Mind you, we're butt naked in a cell of maybe 6, 7 guys. They'd give us paper to cover up with at night because they shot all the windows out. It's A block. So what I began to process in my mind was, you know, there's got to be a better system in this to treat human beings better. Because, you know, they treated us as if, and I'm talking about white, black, Spanish, whatever, they treated us as if we were just, they treat cattle better than they did us. You know, they were more humane. And I said, this got to change. So I began thinking about, you know, the court system, the legal system, the police system, and saying that they all were in collusion together that created this type of warehouse and this type of atmosphere. And to this day, that's what I've been trying to put my energy in effort to, you know, trying to see, you know, we got to come up with a better legal system than this. That was my thought.
Okay, thank you, Lateef. All right, so my other brothers, Nikhil, Che, and Eddie, I'm going to ask you to answer the question a little shorter than Lateef did, okay? Eddie,
Okay,
you're
I'll
up next.
answer.
Well, for
Okay,
me,
Nikhil, you want to go next? Okay.
did you say
One of
Eddie
you.
next?
Okay.
Let's have Eddie and then Nikhil and Che, you'll be last.
So the thing for me is that stuff doesn't get done unless we take action. You know, people say, hey, write your congressman. You want to do that, fine. But, you know, when stuff changes, we have to get together and we have to take action, and we have to take action together. And to me, the message from Attica is that we need to forget about our differences, find our commonality, and get clear on that and work together to make changes. And that's why we still remember Attica for what it was, because everybody came together and took action. And that's what Attica means to me. Attica means fight back, and it means fight back together.
Okay, thank you, Eddie.
Yeah.
Nikhil.
Like Eddie said, Attica means fight back. You know, things change, the mentality changed in prison. You know, 20 years used to be a lot of time. Now it's like a skid bit, considering the time they're giving out. They locking up babies, taking them away from their families. They convicting people and then realizing 20 years later that they made a mistake. You know, this whole system has to change. People have to realize that they have to vote to change these laws. They got to put people in office to change these laws. I don't think it's going to ever happen in my lifetime. You know, what I think needs to happen is the whole don't kill everybody and then start all over again. And that's what I feel. But if you want to do it with this system still here, you have to vote. You have to vote and put your votes in, or either stay out of trouble and do the right thing. This is your parents, and try to get a good education and make a decent living for yourself.
Okay, thank you, Nikhil. Che, last but not least, and Che, I'm going to tell you, you have 1.5 minutes.
Prisons will never change. Never. It will always remain the same. We need to support our brothers and sisters that are currently confined, because what happened to us is happening to them every day. You know, when they get beat up, they get abused, they get brutalized, all that stuff happens in prisons. So we need to support the prison movement, you know, because in supporting the prison movement, we are supporting our own struggles. And I believe that together, the prison movement and us out here, together, we will be able to bring home all our families that are in prisons, including prisoners of war and political prisoners.
Yeah. Well, I thank all of you so much for sharing some of those experiences. And I hope that our audience will go to the website for atticaisallofus.org, where they can see longer interviews with each of you, where you got to share a lot more of the history, because it's so very important. And this is a history that we know we should never, ever forget. And I hope that our audience is going to stay with us. We're getting ready to have a short film interlude that's going to be very, very interesting. And then we're going to follow that with another panel that will include a lawyer who was involved in the efforts following the 13th of September, one of the observers, and another one of our Attica brothers. So I don't know if our MC is coming on or if we're going to go straight to the film interlude, but I know that's what's going to happen next. And I hope that our audience won't, if they say, don't turn that dial, stay tuned and continue to learn so that you'll know what actions you need to take in the future. Like Eddie said, we have to work together to build a better future for everyone. Thank you again.
My name is Dan Alterman. I was the first bunch of lawyers into the prison after the massacre on September 17th, 1971. I knew I was in a fight for the brothers' lives. I mean, it was not bullshit. It was true. And so therefore, I'm not making friends. I'm going about my business. I'm taking notes. I'm writing names. And I gave those notes to whomever passed it on that hopefully became a basis to use later on. But the actions of the state, shooting fish in the barrel, was so omnipotent and so wrong and so horrible. We all saw it. We also saw wounds. This was a legal war, and that's why it meant fight back, because, you know, the odds were so ridiculously large.
I had no sense of danger to myself personally, but we were in a war zone, really. Most of us were pretty young, and well, no one had at any age had encountered anything like this. I mean, nobody was in an actual war. It was a revelation that was, I think, such a vivid shock that, you know, he said, "You have a court order, I have a bayonet." When I say we, I'm really speaking for myself, but I think everybody did have the same reaction, that we believed in the power of a piece of paper and then saw that it was kind of worthless.
What they did in Attica, when they came down, when they sent the police there, they sent the police from all the different places. Every prison was locked up, every maximum security prison. So all the police was in Attica. Attica was a big thing. And they all remember me from the box and from other places. And it was like a personal grudge. So when they came in, they saw me on the ground, I was bleeding, and my friend was laying across my legs. They saw me, they said, "They're gonna kill her," you know, and they came over and kicked me in the face and everything, rolled me over. They ripped my shirt off, and they said, "He's shot." They said, "He ain't shot bad enough." So they started hitting me in the bullet wounds and everything. And they rolled me over and they handcuffed me behind my back. And I think it was one of the captains said, "Man, keep the shotgun on him. If he sneezes, blow his brains out."
You just can't take an individual and put him away and say, you know what, you have 20 years, you have 10 years, and you know what, forget about it. I understand what it is to be taken from your mother at 11 years old and be incarcerated. I understand what it is to be framed for a crime at 13 years old and you didn't do it. I understand what it is to go through, to be taken to see your daughters once a year. When I was 21, 22 years old, 23 years old in Attica and Dannemora. So I understand the prison system, and that's why I fight for prison rights.
A lot of things was happening during that time of the information we seen what was happening on the outside world. Hell no, we won't go referring to Vietnam. Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. That sense of our racial integrity and upbringing. These things was happening, and it was contrary that the attitude that was happening in Attica. I gravitated to people that wanted to do change, that said, you know, this shouldn't exist the way it is. And geez, 2 years earlier, 3 years earlier, I was sentenced to 25 years to my natural life after being convicted of a trial of murder, which I felt was unfair. So there was a lot of rebellion, a lot of hostility within me itself, you know. And that was all part and parcel of what Attica was.
Thank you so much, everyone. We appreciate you listening to our brothers and to our leaders, the godmother, Sophia Elijah. Thank you to the Alliance for Families for Justice. We thank you for having us. Also, the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. We thank you for the opportunity to listen. They say that we stand on the back of our ancestors. You just listen to our ancestors. Over 100 organizations signed on tonight to commemorate the 50-year anniversary for the Attica uprising. You can feel the pain, the hurt, and the desperation of our brothers. But one of the things that you can definitely understand that they threaded through their history is that we need to take action. It is a testament of how important it is for the 100 organizations, our brothers and sisters, those of us who are fighting today, to lead and learn from Attica. The legacy, it should give us an opportunity to be moved and to get ready to take action. With that being said, our next panel is led by the fearless leader, Victor Good. He's recently retired, yes, but still working here with us this evening from City University School of Law. He also is the former national director of the National Conference for Black Lawyers, and he is definitely fearless in his work. And this evening, he will have another panel of brothers that will lead us. And don't forget, standing on the back of our brothers. Victor, take it away.
Thank you, Yolanda. Thank you very much. First, I'd like to welcome everyone in the audience. Thank you for joining us this evening. If you were here for the first panel, I know you heard lots of exciting, informative, and in-depth conversations about the events that led up to the Attica resistance. Well, this second panel that I'm moderating is titled Attica Fights Back. And so I'm going to ask my panelists to join us and introduce themselves. We're going to continue the conversation that started in that first panel from the perspective of some of the various participants that were part of the resistance and the fight back to the conditions that gave rise to this uprising. So first, let me ask Brother James Brown to introduce himself.
Okay, my name is James Brown, and I was up in Attica during the uprising, slightly before. I was transferred from Auburn as a result of a uprising there, and that's how I wound up in Attica.
Okay, we're going to get into that more in depth in just a moment. Now let's hear from Reverend Scott. Would you tell the panelists, tell the audience who you are and what you were doing at that time? Reverend Scott, we don't have audio on you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, very good.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. My name is Minister Raymond Scott. I was president of the Fight Organization in Rochester, New York when this happened. And the people that had loved ones there came over to our organization and asked us to help and find out what the situation was like there and if their loved ones were safe. And so that was what propelled me into going to Attica and wound up getting into the yard as an observer.
And finally, we have attorney Michael Deutsch.
My name is Michael Deutsch. I'm an attorney with the People's Law Office in Chicago, and I was one of the organizers of the Attica Brothers Legal Defense And 20 years later, I was one of class counsel that brought the civil rights suit on behalf of the victims of the state police and prison guards massacre.
James, when you introduced yourself, you told us that you were a transfer from Auburn. What happened at Auburn before Attica, and how did the events at Auburn influence in any way the Attica Rebellion?
Well, the riot in Auburn started from them unjustifiably locking people up for virtually no reason at all. So as a result, we wanted to make sure that they was all right and what have you. And the officers wasn't in compliance with our demands at the time, so we kind of took control of the institution. We opened up the cells and let those brothers out. And as a result, that's what happened at Attica. It wasn't severe as, at Auburn, it wasn't severe as Attica, but it was like a spark, so to say.
So just to clarify for our audience, when you say lockup, you're talking about having inmates who were in general population put into some form of segregation. Is that right?
Well, yes. Some was in segregation, some just locked up in their cells. They just wouldn't let them out their cells.
Okay.
So we took it upon ourselves, the inmates, kind of like take control of the units and let them out on their own.
How did the prison officials respond to that? And how did that bring you to Attica?
Well, what happened was they responded, but it wasn't a violent takeover, but it was something that they had to consider deeply. Auburn was kind of like a special type of institution where they had, high school. You get your high school diploma, you can go to college. The institution made license plates, because actually license plates were made in New York State in prisons. So it was kind of like a semi-honor prison, but they was very laid back. It wasn't a lot of restrictions on the inmates, and it was like what you call a lower, like a class of institution. I meant to say a lower level. So as a result, when they kind of like things simmered down, they just started shipping people out and wanted to turn the population over. So they started sending people to different institutions.
So that's how you got to Attica?
That's how I got to Attica, yes.
And how did Attica compare to your experience at Auburn?
It's totally different. But when I first went to Attica, I went straight to the segregation unit. So I didn't have very much time in the Attica, in the Attica prison itself. I didn't have access to a lot of whatever little programs they had going there because people that was there from Attica, they kind of like spearheaded that action. So we was basically on the payment no line list because people's on the unit that I was in, they went to work, but they wouldn't let me go to work. So I just either stayed in and haphazardly, I guess I became a farmer, so to say, because I bought some seeds from the commissary and I started growing my own vegetations and stuff, but they wouldn't let me work.
Well, some people have described Attica as an old man's prison. What did that mean? And how did that characterization of Attica contribute to the rebellion?
It was an older population there because Auburn, a lot of people went there, they was young. As a matter of fact, when I was in Auburn, I was one of the youngest inmates there. When I got to Attica, I was definitely one of the youngest because they didn't have the programs and it was an institution that wasn't geared toward rehabilitation, primarily because it was an older population. And like in Attica was like 4 institutions in one. You had 4 separate units in the A, B, C, and D block, and sometimes you won't even know who's in the other blocks. You could have a brother there. 4 or 5
so because of this older population, you had a lot of inmates who had been enduring the conditions of Attica for a long time.
Yes, yes.
Do you think that contributed in some respects to the resistance?
Well, I mean, it does because I think because the reputation of the Attica inmates, for the people that was riding in Auburn, they wind up to Attica, it was kind of like an influence because people there was kind of inquisitive, what happened, what went on there and so forth and so on. So I guess an advantage to explaining that to other inmates in Attica, it kind of like is a little spark and things is a little heated up already because of Auburn.
Give us a little bit of the personal perspective that you had when the uprising began. Where were you and what did you do during that period?
I was in B block. And what happened was something that stimulated the police's activities was because of Jonathan Jackson had got killed in California. His younger brother Jonathan, tried to break him out, and he tried to say that Jonathan Jackson had a gun, but it was hidden in an afro. So we realized how senseless that was. So it got around. Sometimes people go to church services. That's when different people can meet in the church services. So, and that's the day they would go. And the consensus was that when we go to foods to eat, no one's not going to say anything and no one's not going to eat. And basically that's what happened. So that created a lot of tension, So as a result, they began locking some brothers up for that. I guess probably for questioning, what have you. And then from that point, once again, they just took control of the units and started opening cells. And when people kind of like breaking loose, it's a control center in Attica. From that center, you could control the opening from cells out into the corridor from each unit. So when they did that, they realized that there was some type of confrontation going on. They closed off all the units, and basically the only unit people was able to get to was the D yard. All other units was closed off. And
then what happened?
Then, they started taking correctional officers hostages and what have you. And the first day was very confusing. It wasn't really an organized event. It was just something that just spontaneously happened. So after the first day or so, people started coming up with grievances. And now the term that we was going to negotiate was the grievances. And I think after the third day, what happened was one of the correctional officers had died. And that set a whole different tone in the correctional officer's attitude. And it didn't make things look that good for the inmates.
I think at that point of the story, we can now turn to Reverend Scott, because while you were experiencing that inside Attica, there were groups on the outside that heard what was going on, were concerned, deeply concerned. And Reverend Scott, why don't you tell our audience where you were and how you responded to the events?
Well, at that time, I was president of an organization called the Fight Organization. And I was president at that time. And if there was anything that happened in the neighborhoods around us, then people would make a beeline to our office and talk about it. And then we would try to help out and see if we could settle that situation. So a couple of, actually about 8 ladies came over to our office, and they had heard about the Attica uprising, and they didn't know what to do, so they came to us. And they explained the situation, and the long and the short of it is that we contacted a couple of people who were able to help us get down to Attica. In fact, we drove down right behind the Monroe County Sheriff's Department. And when we got there, I was looking for Arthur E., who was a legislator, and he was the chairman of the prisons for the with the legislation.
Yeah, he was in the state assembly, wasn't he?
No, he was in the
state senate.
Assembly.
He was in the legislature.
State senate. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. So, well, I knew him from Buffalo. I knew about him from Buffalo because that was my hometown. So we were waiting for him to come when we got on the grounds, and he wasn't there at that point, but he pulled up and went over and talked to him, myself and another minister named Marvin Chandler. And so when we talked to him, we explained that we had some people back in Rochester who were loved ones of the inmates. And they wanted to know what was going on and whether their loved ones were safe. And so I told Arthur, if in fact you could just find out how these guys are doing and let us know, then I will take it back to them and they'll be satisfied. And so he said, hold on a minute. The long and short of it is he went inside. He said he had to talk to Commissioner Oswald and he would come back out and tell us what was going on. But when he went in.
Were you outside the prison at this time?
We were outside the prison, yeah. There were a lot of people on the grounds from that area. And so I went over with Arthur. I'm sorry, he went in and talked to Commissioner Oswald and then came back. And when he did, he said, listen, I talked to the commissioner. He wanted to ask you two ministers if in fact you would be willing to come into the yard with us and see if we could, just kind of slow this thing down and hopefully bring it to some amiable conclusion. And so we said yes. And we had to go in, we had to sign papers saying that if anything happened to us, they weren't going to take fault for it. Mm-hmm. And so we did sign the papers and we went in, and that was how we got in. It was interesting to me because after I got married, I moved to Rochester, but prior to that, I lived in Buffalo. And when I walked through the gauntlet that they had, I started hearing my name called by several guys, some from Buffalo, some from Rochester. Hey, Raymond, hey, Raymond. And I look, and these guys were, I was saying Billy, and, I was calling other names as well. And actually, it was an interesting feeling for me because I felt secure. Mm. When I felt them, I'm walking through this gauntlet and then going down to the head table and sitting there with the people who were the negotiators there. And Commissioner Oswald went in with us. And so we got in, and then they asked us about who we were and how we got there and what was our affiliation with the people on the outside. And the guys in Rochester in particular and Buffalo knew about the fight organization, so we got a good welcome there.
Now, Reverend Scott, at this point, how many were part of your group of civilian observers?
It was about 5, that's all.
Only 5, okay.
At that time, it was one lawyer, I forgot his name, but then there was Arthur E., myself, Marvin Chandler, and then it was the commissioner, Commissioner Oswald. And we sat there and we talked, and well, actually we introduced ourselves. Each one of us did, that we came in for the first time. And when that happened, we were well received. And then after that happened,
did you get to have interaction with the inmates or only with the prison officials? No, these were they had a head table, and the inmates were leaders at the head table. Okay. And they sat on one side of the table and we sat on the other. James, were you part of that group?
No, I wasn't.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sure you knew the men who were.
Well, what happened was I didn't know very many people that did. Like I said, the news that people have been there maybe a couple of years, so they knew and felt what was going on at Attica. I went from Auburn straight to the segregation unit. Mm-hmm. When I came to Attica, I may have been in population 2 months, and people from other blocks, I wouldn't have no way of knowing them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Reverend Scott, what was that interaction like between you and the inmate negotiating committee?
Well, they were glad, and I knew the spokesman from Rochester, L.D. Barkley, and so we were welcomed there, But then one of the guys, I remember, it got to be a bit heated because they felt like Commissioner Oswald had played a game on them. And he didn't live up to one of the commitments that he said he was going to make happen. And so, and this guy that was speaking said, in fact, Commissioner Oswald, we just might not let you out of here. And everybody just kind of looked around, and I got the microphone at that particular point. And I said to the brothers, I said, listen, brothers, I said, we gave our word. We gave this man a commitment for safe passage in and safe passage out. Now, they may not keep their line, they may not keep their word, but we'll keep ours. And some of the brothers started, clapping and and saying right on, that kind of thing. And so we talked a bit more with them, and after a while, they let him out. Mm-hmm. And that was a highlight for me because I didn't know what was going to happen.
Well, when we talk about what was going to happen, we spoke earlier and you said that as the tension began to mount, you and the other observers made a decision to stay inside the prison. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. We spent the night there. I did anyway, because some would leave and then come back, and then others would leave and come back. We wanted to make sure that somebody was there at all times.
And why was that?
And, pardon me?
Why was that?
Well, I think our presence there for the inmates in particular, I thought made them feel a sense of security because we would be there to just watch what was going on. And bottom line is we could go out and tell the story.
Yeah.
Of what we were seeing and what we were experiencing. So
you were a connection to the outside world.
Pardon me?
You were a connection to the outside world for them.
Yes, yes. And I said when I spoke there one time, after about a year later when we went back for the anniversary, and I was asked to speak first by Arthur Eve, who was coordinating everything. And it just dawned on me that when we went down there and thinking about all the things that they had said, in the past year, it dawned on me that they weren't really expecting. I can't say they weren't expecting, but the bottom line is people needed to know what was going on in there. Mm-hmm. And if they felt that if people outside knew what was going on there, then people would be appalled and they would rise up to help bring about a change. And so that's what they did that whole time when they were there. They spoke out. And not only speaking out into the people there, they spoke to the people outside of there. And we took that message outside. Mm-hmm. And when everything happened, it got worse. But then it got to some degrees better.
Well,
and I'm not saying the prison turned out to be great and everything like that. No.
Well, where were you when the prison officials decided to retake the prison and assaulted the inmates?
We were, when they actually did the decision, Mr. Oswald came back in to the room that we were meeting in, and he didn't come and tell us that they were going to go after the inmates the next day. So we spent some time with him. And then finally, I remember at one point I said, Mr. Oswald, the way he was talking, I said, it seems to me that you know what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. And he just said, well, and then turned around. And some of the people were getting kind of heated in there. I remember Minister Franklin Florence just grabbed, he was talking, and Mr. Oswald turned his back on him. And Minister Florence grabbed him and spun him around. And, but Oswald kept cool. And he said, well, you guys need to leave tonight. And we made up a mind that some of us was going to stay there and the others could go. And then they could come back tomorrow. And so I and about, I think it was eight of us all together. And we stayed, we spent the night there. And they tried to get us to go again. And we said, no, we're not going. And they said, okay, well, you do it at your own risk. Yeah, well, we'll stay.
James, where were you when the assault took place?
The assault took place the next morning. And they came in and said, okay, in essence, we're going to take the prison back. Mm-hmm. And so you need to leave. And we said, no, we're not going. And they said, okay, well, if you stay here, you should, they gave us tape to type up our wrists and our ankles and cloths to wet them and then put them over our eyes. Well, I didn't know what that was about. I figured, we all figured that they were going to use some kind of tear gas, but the windows were locked tight. When things happened, the tear gas got through those tight windows and started burning our eyes and everything. And that's why they had us put the wrap our ankles and around our hands as well.
Reverend Scott, let me bring in James Brown here. Okay. James, where were you when the assault to retake the prison took place?
Well, mostly we had an idea that it was going to lead to that because once one of the correctional officers had died, that kind of like put us in a bad way, and it just made things more intense. And so what a lot of us was doing was trying to hide behind correctional officers, figuring that they probably wouldn't shoot us like they have actually did, because they was placing themselves on top of, from the windows, from different units, and we could see that they had guns and rifles drawn on us. So some of us were trying to hide behind different police officers, figuring they wouldn't shoot, but they shot anyhow. They shot some of their own, and guys, how many? I don't know exactly how many inmates got killed, but that's what. But I was in the yard at the time. But prior to that, the first 3 days or so, I was one of the people that was designated to kind of oversee the correction officers that was being held for hostages, to making sure that the inmates weren't too hostile and tried to harm them. So that was our job. Some of us that was designated that responsibility, and that's one of the responsibilities that I had, to make sure that, along with brothers from the Nation of Islam, primarily, they spearheaded that, and we would protect the police officers that was being held as hostages, to assure that the inmates wouldn't harm them.
Well, our first panel covered some of that ground, so now I'd like to shift things a little bit, because we can't really talk about an Attica fight back perspective without bringing in the role of a number of progressive lawyers who played a vital role in that effort. Michael, how did you get involved in the legal fight back on behalf of the Attica inmates?
Well, there was a call put out by the National Lawyers Guild that they asked lawyers to come to Attica, Buffalo, and Attica to help with the brothers. And we had a meeting of our office, and we had been in a new office that started in 1969, was a law collective, and we were representing members of the Black Panther Party and Young Lords Party. And we were very active in the movement in Chicago. And we were beginning to do legal prison work as well. And we felt an obligation to go to Attica. And we sent two of the people from our office there. And they were there among the first lawyers that got into the prison. And it's important to note here that the lawyers came from New York on the day of the massacre. And they had a federal court order to get into prison, signed by the local federal judge, John Curtin, and they refused to let him in. And they called the judge, and he refused to enforce his order. And they didn't get in until the 17th, 4 days later. And while they were barred from the prison, the state police and the head of the prosecution, they already had diverted all the resources from a new committee called the Organized Crime Task Force. They diverted all those to prosecute the Attica brothers. And they were in the yard for 4 days gathering evidence. They weren't preserving evidence. They weren't keeping track of where people were shot or killed, or what bullets were used, or what guns were used. And already they were beginning a cover-up. In the first days, they were going to be covering up the crimes of the state police and the prison guards who were involved in the assault on the prisoners. And as it must have been mentioned, 39 unarmed people were killed on that day. They fired 4,000 rounds of ammunition in 6 minutes. And 10 of their own people were killed, 29 prisoners were killed, and another 100 prisoners were wounded by gunshot. So by the time the lawyers first got in on the 17th, brothers had not gotten medical care. There were bullet wounds and people had not been treated. Broken bones had not been treated. And they were already geared up in interrogating prisoners to prepare for indictments against the prisoners. And we then set to work to find out what was going on with the prisoners and trying to get them medical care. And they were all put in isolation. 4 prisoners to a cell, not enough food, not enough clothing. And they were being taken out of the prison at night after they were put in a cell and threatened with guns and said they were going to get them and really terrorize the prisoners days after September 13th.
Now, usually, of course, a lawyer and client form a relationship, and the lawyer defends his or her client. But you had an unusual situation given the number of people were involved. How did you all figure out how to respond to that? And what was the legal response?
Well, we knew there were going to be indictments, and we knew that we had to prepare for them. And in fact, a grand jury was created in Wyoming County, which is where the prison is. And the prison is the largest employer in the whole county. And when they picked this grand jury, all 23 were white people, and several of them had friends who worked in the prison. And even the chairperson of the grand jury was a bus driver that had a friend that was held hostage. So we moved to dismiss the grand jury because they were prejudiced. And of course, that was denied. We asked that we could put in some evidence of what happened and the crimes of the state police. That was denied. And basically, it was a kangaroo grand jury that was going to indict just prisoners. And we were preparing for that. And sure enough, a year later, they indicted 62 prisoners and 42 different indictments with 1,200 felony counts, half of which could end up with life in prison. So we had a tremendous amount of cases that we had to deal with. And what we did was figure out a way to keep the unity of the brothers. The brothers were very strong, very unified, had a lot of political consciousness, and wanted to stay together. So rather at that point getting individual lawyers for all the 62 prisoners, we kept them all together, and Attica Brothers Legal Defense represented all the prisoners. And we filed joint motions, hundreds of pages of motions on behalf of all the indicted prisoners.
Now, when the assault initially took place, the public was told that the inmates had killed the guards who were held hostage. How did you all sort that out so that finally the truth came out?
Well, with the help of the coroner of Monroe County, who did the autopsies on the guards and civilian employees who were killed, and he found each one was killed by bullet wounds. Nobody died as a result of having their throat slit. So that lie was exposed within a few days after the rebellion. So what we did.
Did you all begin to organize? Because I was a law student at that time, and I heard about the Attica Defense Legal Committee or Attica Defense effort. What was that, and how did it begin to take shape?
Well, first thing we did was stop the prosecution from going forward because we inundated them with motions and paper. They were looking to bring these cases right away. And as a result of our filing these motions, it took them a year to respond to these motions. In the meantime, we created what we called Attica Brothers Legal Defense. We had a big building in downtown Buffalo, and we had lawyers in there. We had investigators. We had people who were doing political outreach. We had people who were doing fundraising, and so we had a multi effort. And maybe 50 people worked in that office during the time that we were preparing to defend the brothers. And
my friend and my former dean at the law school, Haywood Burns, was involved in that in some way, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. Haywood Burns, first the head of the Attica Brothers Legal Defense was a lawyer from California named Don Jelinek. And he was the one that devised this strategy to keep the brothers together by filing motions on behalf of all of them and not getting them individual lawyers. Then Jelinek moved on, and Haywood Burns became the director of the Attica Brothers Legal Defense. And he was the one that was headed up all this work that we were doing in this massive office, both the outreach work and the legal work.
And Haywood had just stepped down as being the national director of the National Conference of Black Lawyers. And that's when I first met him and began to hear about the work of the Attica Defense Committee.
Yeah, and National Conference of Black Lawyers were very involved in the Attica cases. Margaret Burnham was one of the defense lawyers. Haywood was there, and other people from the National Conference of Black Lawyers were involved in organizing the defense of the brothers.
And I understand this became an ongoing organizing effort. How did that go, and what were the kind of things that the legal team was engaged in during this period?
Well, one of the critical things was to challenge the jury system in Erie County, which is where the trials were going to be held. That was in Buffalo. And we had some expert lawyers on that from Detroit who came in and did a jury challenge. And as a result of that jury challenge, they had to reformulate the whole jury system in Buffalo. And they had to add 150,000 young people to the jury rolls because there were no young people in the jury pools. And this was a big, significant change in terms of the jury selection. And then we went out and we did investigation about the lawyers, did investigation, Legal Works did investigation on behalf of the, looking to find the National Guard medical team that was in there during the 4 days and when the massacre occurred, doctors who were came in afterwards, and the brothers. We were trying to build a case for a defense, and the brothers were very clear. They wanted to put the state on trial. They wanted to show that Attica was caused by the conditions and inhumane conditions, and that we wanted the the real criminals to be indicted. That was a demand that Rockefeller for ordering the massacre, Oswald for denying medical care, and Mancusi for denying medical care, and then the head of the assault force, the guy by the name of John Monahan, we wanted them to be indicted, and of course the state police and the prison guards.
I'm so glad you made that point, Michael, because, you know, as someone who watched this unfold, it became a masterful effort at what later became known as a political defense. Not political in the sense that legal strategy was abandoned, but political in the sense that legal strategy, political strategy was integrated in a way that represented really the highest level of legal professionalism, while at the same time a new approach toward raising consciousness through the law and through the process of doing the typical work that legal defense lawyers do.
Yeah, it was a way that we figured out that we could raise the politics and do the legal criminal defense. And to many of us, it was a new way because we were dealing with a mass defense with many people charged, and we had to figure out a strategy to keep unity and promote the issues that the brothers were most interested in.
I want you to tell us two more things as we proceed. First, I think it's important for our audience to hear what happened to these indictments in these criminal cases. But also, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about the civil case that came out of this and how the political momentum and direction began to change.
Okay, it turned out that there were 4 trials, 3 acquittals, the jury in a kidnapping case. So a lot of the brothers were charged with kidnapping for taking the hostages, which had a life sentence. They were acquitted in 2 hours. The first case they brought was a brother by the name of Willie Smith, who was charged with sodomy. They brought a sodomy case as the first case to, kind of disrupt and discredit the brothers, saying and he was acquitted. And then a guy with a gas gun was acquitted as well. And then the main case was the 2 Native American prisoners, young Native American prisoners who shouldn't have even been in Attica, were charged with the murder of Quinn, who was the guard who died in the early moments of the breaking of the Times Square door, and he was trampled. And they had this big trial saying that they had murdered Quinn. And one of them, Johnny Hill Dacajawea, was represented by William Kunstler, and the other one, Charlie Joe Pernasseles, was represented by Ramsey Clark, the former Attorney General of the United States. And unfortunately, they were convicted. And after that, there was a guy by the name of Malcolm Bell who became a lawyer with the grand jury investigation of the crimes of the state. And he was in charge of that. And after several months, he realized that they had no intention of indicting any state police, any prison guards for murder, and certainly not Rockefeller or Oswald or Mancusi or Fail. So he resigned, and he had a big press conference, and he said that this is not fair. Of course, we knew that already, that he already covered up a lot of the evidence. And as a result of his coming forward, the governor, who was then Hugh Carey, ordered there be an investigation of the investigation, essentially. Did the state police cover up evidence, and it was the whole investigation one-sided. And this investigation by a guy by the name of Meyer, who was a judge, a New York State judge, found that there was a one-sided investigation. And as a result of that, Hugh Carey came forward and said, I'm not going to let these criminal cases go forward. I'm going to give clemency to all the prisoners. And the 2 that were convicted, I'm going to give one who got a life sentence the right to go to parole immediately, and the other one I'm going to let out. So no other prisoners were indicted or charged or convicted as a result of the Attica situation.
Michael, at first glance, that looks like a very humane response from the governor, but what do you think the real reasons were behind that?
The real reason was obvious. They didn't want to charge the state police, or they didn't want to charge the prison guards who went in there with their own guns and shot down people surrendering, lying on the ground. And of course, they didn't want to indict all these guards that were involved in the brutality and the torture, like Big Black was on a table for 4 hours, and all these people were beaten as they ran through a gauntlet. So basically, that was a big victory, but it was because they did not want to charge the state police or the prison guards or anybody else. So that's why they dismissed all the cases, so they wouldn't have to indict these the state police and the prison guards. 20 years later, I'm going to go into the civil case now, right? 20 years later, we finally got a right to go to trial in the civil case, which had been languishing because the federal judge in Buffalo sat on a motion to dismiss for 4 years. He delayed it all, and finally, 20 years later, we were able to go to trial against, they dismissed Rockefeller from the case, so the case was against Oswald, the Commissioner of Corrections, Mancusi, the warden, Monahan, who led the state police assault, and Carl Fail, who was the deputy warden, who was in charge of rehousing the prisoners and saw all the torture and brutality that went on. And we had this trial in front of this judge who, in the beginning, refused to ask the prospective jurors if they had any friends or people that worked at Attica, what they felt about prisons, what their ideas about racism was. He just picked 6 jurors in 2 hours. And at that point, the class counsel, which was myself, Dennis Cunningham, Liz Fink, and Joe Heath, 4 of us. And Liz was very key because the judge threatened to throw the case out unless we got going with the civil case.
Michael, hold that for a moment, because we do have some lawyers and law students in the audience. We also have a lot of non-lawyers. Why don't you lay out for the audience exactly what was the civil case and what you were charging the state with?
Okay, the civil case was a class action for all the brothers that were in DER. And basically we said that they were victims of cruel and unusual punishment by an assault that was intended to kill and not to rescue anyone. In addition, they denied the prisoners medical care. They brought in 39 ambulances and they set them outside the prison, and they took each one of the hostages and put them in an individual ambulance, and they had no preparation for the brothers. And in fact, Mancusi called Buffalo and said, "We have a problem here. Could you send some doctors?" And when they came an hour away, they realized it was a bloody, gory mess. People were dying. And in fact, 10 prisoners died from bleeding to death because they didn't have medical care. And so there was a denial of medical care, which is an 8th Amendment violation. And also there was the denial of or allowing, supervising the torture and brutality against Mancusi and against Spale, who was the deputy warden who supervised the rehousing of the prisoners. So the first 6 jurors, they picked them without finding out what their prejudices were. And we went before the judge and we said, "We're not going to go ahead unless you change the way you're going to pick this jury." And we backed him up, and the second 6 jurors were picked with asking them questions about their biases and about their connections to the prison and to the
Now, you say this was a class action lawsuit. Who are the members of this class, and how were they chosen to be part of this lawsuit?
They were all the people that were in D-Yard and was subject to the assault and the rehousing and the torture and brutality.
How many did that turn out to be?
Well, there was 1,200 in the D-Yard.
Yeah. Wow.
So obviously we couldn't bring individual cases for each person. So that's why you bring a class action, because they were all treated similarly. You know, they were all subject to the assault, and then they were all subject to this, the rehousing where they ran through gauntlets and beaten up. And of course, some of them were tortured like black. And then they were thrown in the box and without clothes, without food, forward to a cell. So this was all part of injecting cruel and unusual punishment, a violation of the Eighth Amendment, and inflicting torture and death without due process. So those were all claims.
A second, Michael, because I want to ask Reverend Scott and James Brown, in the aftermath of the assault, Reverend Scott, did your civilian observation group play any role at all?
I guess I don't understand your question. Try me again.
After the assault took place, what did your group of ministers and other concerned people do? What happened?
Yes. Well, one of the things that we did was work on getting funds together for their defense. And a number of them were able to get out if, in fact, they had the bail money. And so we raised money to get them out while they were waiting on the trials. And we kept the whole issue alive. We didn't want anybody to just walk away and forget this. So we kept having rallies and things like that. And as I said, it stayed alive. It really stayed alive. And what Michael just said was I mean, just great hearing it again. They did a phenomenal job.
I remember the slogan at the time. I think it was "Attica is all of us."
That's right.
And also,
the real slogan was always remember Attica. Remember Attica. Remember Attica.
James Brown, what was your situation after the assault took place? What happened to you?
Well, they had the inmates, walk the yards. They stripped us, had us walk the yard naked with our hands behind our back. And they kept announcing that anyone that's wounded, to pull off to this particular exit. I don't quite remember. And there was a brother behind me. He said, "Brother, you know you shot, right?" I said, "Yes, I know." So he said, "Well, they're announcing for you to go to the thing." But a voice inside of me kept telling me, "Don't separate yourself from the masses of people." So later on, after the investigation, a lot of people that went over to that unit, to that exit, wound up coming up dead afterwards.
Wow.
So, and like I said, it was very humiliating. I remember very thoroughly because it started raining. But that was to humiliate us. And after that, they sent us to, I forgot what yard we went out, but we used to gun. We had to walk through a gun until we get to the segregation unit. We used to go up spiral stairs, and they had to get beat with sticks on our way through the gauntlet and up the stairs. And after that point, people didn't know who was who because we couldn't even see each other. So some people were saying, "Yeah, James, you heard Tommy Hicks got killed. Tommy Hicks is dead." And I remember when I was going through the gauntlet, they were saying, "Yeah, you're going to meet your friend Tommy Hicks in the Happy Hunting Grounds." So I thought it was the segregation unit. But when I got up there, somebody said, "James, Isaiah," they called me Isaiah, that's my middle name. Isaiah, is that your son? He said, "Man, Tommy Hicks is dead." And then it registered on me. I guess that was supposed to be my designation to be killed, murdered also, because we were the only ones that came from Attica. So it was that, and when they was taking them, they kept saying those things, because back then they had a slogan, "Black is beautiful." And the other officers were saying, "Yeah, black is beautiful, especially when it's bleeding. We got you black MFs now." The look in their eyes, they was foaming at the mouth while they were saying this. I really couldn't believe what I was seeing, but that's what I seen.
Wow.
So that was it.
How long were you in Attica after the assault?
Not too long, because they turned the population over from there. They shipped me out to Comstock. Then after the indictments, they sent a lot of us to Auburn, back to Auburn prison in the segregation unit. Mm-hmm. Then after the indictments came back, they had us all in one central institution. And
And what the legal defense team was doing, they were sending a lot of law students in to call us down on a daily basis so that, you know, to make sure that we wasn't being further assaulted by the correction officers.
I remember that. The effort was just to stay in touch with everybody, because if the prison officials knew that the outside was watching, they were less likely to single people out for brutality.
Yeah.
Michael, the story back to you and the evolving civil lawsuit.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that there was two other trials that were very important that I didn't mention, and I think are important. The leadership was charged with conspiracy to commit murder because three prisoners were found dead after they retook the prison. And they charged the people who were the negotiators and the heads of security with conspiracy to commit murder. And Shango was one of the people charged. He had a trial, was represented by lawyers from Detroit and Haywood Burns, Ernie Goodman and Bill Goodman, and he was acquitted. And then the other trial was for Jomo, and he was represented by a local Buffalo lawyer, and he was convicted of a minor charge, not murder at all. And as a result of that, he didn't have to do any more time at all. So that was important because those were people who were in the leadership. Big Black, Roger Champion, Herbert X. Blyden were never brought to trial, even though they were in that indictment. Back to the civil case. When the jury went out to deliberate, the trial went on for 3 months. And I also want to say that lawyers from all over came to help the Attica Brothers, from Boston, from Cleveland, from Detroit, from Rochester, from New York City. Many lawyers came and worked on cases. So it was a joint effort to work on it. But in the civil case, it was us four that I mentioned. And when the jury went out to deliberate, the judge decided he was going to go take a vacation to Barbados. And of course, the jury had all these questions. So when they had their first questions, they brought out a telephone box and put it on the bench. And they read the questions to the judge. We couldn't hear him. He couldn't hear us. It was just a scandal. So the chief judge ordered Judge Elfin, who was the judge, to come back and preside over this case. He came back in the middle of the night with dark glasses on, and caught him. And when he came back, he told the jurors, "You're going to deliberate 12 hours a day now." And the jury wrote a letter back to the judge saying, "Oh, no, we're not. We've been deliberating. We've committed to this case, and we're not changing our hours." And they backed up. But unfortunately, the 6 jurors that were picked originally improperly hung the jury. And they found that medical care was denied, but they didn't hold anyone responsible. They found that the assault, they hung on the assault, they hung on the Oswald responsibility, and the only verdict they returned was against the deputy warden who was in charge of the rehousing of the prisoners and saw all the torture and beating. So we had one verdict against them, and then we had what's called damages trials, because this was just for liability. And we just...
So wait a second. So hold that for a moment. The jury found that the deputy warden observed all the brutality that took place, but they didn't point the finger at anyone to be responsible for that brutality.
No, they did. It was against the associate warden, the deputy warden, Carl Fail. They found against him that he was liable for his failure to supervise all this torture and brutality that happened after they retook the prison. So then, since this was only for liability, we had 2 damage trials, one for the worst person that was damaged, and that was Big Black. And the jury returned a $4 million verdict for him. Then we had a trial of the typical person who was run through the gauntlet and beaten up, but didn't have any permanent injuries. The jury found $75,000 for him. So do the math. If there was 1,000 people who were treated that same way, that's $75 million. That's what they were looking at, plus the $4 million from Big Black. So of course they appealed to the Second Circuit, the United States Court of Appeals, and they took that verdict away from us. They said for some reason we had to prove each individual plaintiff was injured by this failure to supervise, and that the jury verdict forms were confusing, and they said we had to start all over again, basically doing 1,200 individual trials.
Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah, and this is after 20 years of work and all this money, and we didn't have the resources to continue like that. But the one thing they did say is maybe you can settle it. They sent the case to the chief judge, Michael Teleska, and he began settlement hearings. And he had all the brothers come and tell what happened to them. And then at the end of that process, which was now 22 years later, he awarded $8 million to the brothers and $4 million to the lawyers. And he gave, it's piddly stuff. For each prisoner that was killed, he gave him $25,000. And for the brothers that were maimed or tortured, $125,000. And for the person that was just run through the gauntlet, $6,000.
Wow.
So what we could have had if they would have affirmed that verdict was millions of dollars, but they didn't want to give prisoners millions of dollars. And they were all tied to Rockefeller anyway. A lot of those judges were friends of Rockefeller, and they weren't about to give money to prisoners, rebelling prisoners. But Teleska worked it out, and that was the result. And as Big Black said, we didn't go in that yard to get a barrel of money. We went to show the world that we were human and we were entitled to be treated as human beings. So it was a Pyrrhic victory in one sense, but a great victory in another sense, because they had to see that these people were constitutional rights, human rights were denied.
Our panel is kind of a bridge. Actually, both panels today are kind of a bridge to the next two panels that are going to come behind us, which talk about going forward. But I think that we can help in that conversation by having some comments from each of our panelists. For you, what did Attica signify, and what is its meaning today? We are commemorating something that happened 50 years ago, but we're also trying to learn from what happened 50 years ago. What do you think some of the lessons are, and how does that inform our communities going forward?
Are you asking me? Or?
Well, I'd like to see who would like to go first on that question? Reverend Scott,
I'll go.
On that.
Yeah.
Going forward.
I think as we look at this situation that we had to endure, I think that we have, if we don't remember it, then it's foredoomed to repeat itself. And that's a very dangerous thing. So we have to be active in looking at these things and not just turn a deaf ear.
Isaiah, can I call you that?
You can call me that.
All right.
To call me.
All right. Isaiah, you've lived through Attica, and you've also lived through the period of time that we call the era of mass incarceration. What are some of the lessons that you've learned from your own experience in the system, in the rebellion, and since you've been out?
Well, one thing in comparing Attica with incarcerated inmates today, it was a totally different situation. Back then, you couldn't do anything to an inmate without the different organizations coming together and making sure that that person was not harmed unjustifiably or period. Back then, like now, you may have gangs fighting against each other. Back then, we had different organizations. We had the Young Lords, the Black Panthers, the Muslims. We had the Weathermen. But they would come together if anything happened to an inmate, and they would go to the staff and make sure that those people wasn't being harmed or hurt like that today. Seemed like inmates is fighting against each other. And in that case, things are not going to never get better for the inmates because they don't have that type of solidarity. They don't have that mental, they're not at that mental level that we was at that time. We fought against the establishment. Today, they fight against each other. They're not going to get any meaningful change as long as it remains as that. So my suggestion is that, if you're in prison and think that they're unjustifiably or that you could better yourselves, then you have to kind of come together as inmates and pull the stash hands and let them know that things could be better, and they didn't have to respond to that. But like I said, the Attica thing, they fought 20 years, and and I remember Michael Deutsch very well. And I remember when they was coming in to see us, my thing was, how these young lawyers gonna help us? They ain't much older than we are. But they stuck together and they fought for us for 20 years, man, and I have to commend them,
Well, I want to thank you for those insights, because it's so important to recognize the relationship between the political consciousness in our communities and the political consciousness of those who come from our communities and find themselves in the criminal justice system. I couldn't have said it better. I really want to thank you for that particular insight.
Okay, thank you.
Michael Deutsch. Not a summation at the end of a trial, but certainly we're looking for your insights about the significance of those events for now and how they might affect particularly younger lawyers today, the many, many non-lawyers who have been part of a struggle to look at issues of police misconduct and issues of mass incarceration. What can you tell us that how it meant things for you and what it might mean going forward?
Well, first I would say that the Attica Brothers were an extraordinary group of men, very politically conscious, very committed, older and been through a lot. They knew about the civil rights movement. A lot of them were associated with the Black Panthers, the Young Lords. And meeting them and working with them really changed my life. Even though I was politically active, the experience of working with them and seeing their resilience and their consciousness and their courage made me think, well, if I'm going to work with the Attica Brothers, I got to make a commitment like that. And I can't just walk away and say, oh, well, they're there and I'm here. Well, that really solidified my political commitment. And I was been involved in prison work from that day on. In people who were rebelling in prison and people who were put in difficult situations and denied human rights. And one of the things, I wrote something called The Road from Attica, because there was a lot of talk about reform after Attica, and there was some level of reform. But the reaction to what happened at Attica was that they decided to build high security prisons where they put people in what they called control units. And they took the politically active people, the politically conscious people, the writ writers, the people who were writing to a congressman, and they classified them and put them in these control units and kept them there indefinitely. And that happened all over the country. All over. Federals had a control unit, California, Illinois, New York. So that was one of the consequences of Attica, that they had these control units locking people up and trying to isolate the politically active and conscious prisoners. And my understanding and my view is that we have to educate the people outside what's going on in these prisons, because they don't know. And they're not allowed in prisons. They can't, and they don't let the media in prisons anymore. They used to let them in. They could film in there. They don't. So the public is ignorant of what goes on in prisons unless they have a loved one or somebody that goes into prison and can tell them about it. We have to break down those prison walls. We have to say there'll be no more Atticas, there'll be no more violation of human rights. And I want to just read a quick quote that Tom Wicker wrote, because his life was changed by Attica. Tom Wicker was a New York Times columnist, and he was one of the observers. And I think he was very deeply moved by it. And he said, In a more lasting sense, the Attica matter is anything but closed. It lives on, settlement or no settlement, a blot on the nation's pride in itself. American justice can go badly wrong, and not just in New York or even in 1971. It could have really happened, and could it have really happened in this country? It could, because it did. If not admitted, it could even happen again. So we have to keep the brothers' names and courage in the forefront as we continue to do our political work and our work on behalf of prisoners.
On behalf of the organizers of this conference, I want to thank each of you for your participation, your insights, but most of all, I want to thank each of you for your participation in the events of that time. I think that when the audience ask, what does the word solidarity mean? Each of you have demonstrated in your own way of what it means and what it looks like. And as all of you have pointed out, it is solidarity, our commitment to work with one another, to engage and connect with one another, that's going to make things like Attica never happen again. And who knows, maybe the idea that we can radically transform criminal justice in America will be more than just an ideal. So on behalf of the organizers, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank our audience for staying with us this evening. And I want to encourage you to continue to sign in to the remaining two panels that will happen over the next few days. So thank you all.
Thank you. Isaiah, good to see you, man.
So, how you feel, man?
Good, how you?
Oh, man.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Boy, a lot of years, huh?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, we done? We done?
Yolanda's going to wrap up for us.
Oh, okay.
Thank you so much. So that was some panel, Victor, Michael, James, and the pastor. Yes, giving us all of the information. So once again, we've learned some things. Educate, language, what has changed? The Correctional Association, Alliance of Families for Justice. Yes, we have learned a lot. We have had an opportunity to hear from the experts, the people who were there. So we just want to make sure that you know that we do have another panel on the 13th from 6 to 8:30. We hope that you have already signed up for that panel. Please make sure that you go to the Alliance of Families for Justice and sign up, or go to Attica is all of us website.org or sign up. So you wanted to know how to get it started, puff it up, open it up, get it moving, stay focused. The work might be over for tonight, but the work is not done. We want to make sure that we continue to break down the walls, as our brothers told us. We have done a lot, but there is yet more to do. You and you are important in this walk. Please stay tuned for the Attica Brothers as they fight back on next week. Come out to Thomas Paine Park out in Foley Square on September 12th and march with us from 1 to 4. Please make sure again that you're at the next panel discussion on September 13th from 6 to 8. Now, there are a few people in the background that we want to say thank you to. Again, we want to thank you and highlight Manhattan Neighborhood Network. We want to highlight Kayla, and we want to highlight Leon, who made sure that you would be able to see all the work that is being done. Shout out to all the advocates. Shout out to you and you. And we thank you for coming, and we thank you for sharing with us. But more importantly, we thank you for the work that you're doing on the ground. Also, lifting up the women and men who may be behind the wall right now, but freedom is going to be theirs, both inside and out. Shout out to the women, men who are listening inside of facilities across the United States. We appreciate you taking the time to be with us. And with that, all of us, have a good evening, continue to stay strong, and be well. Keep hope alive.